Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a perspective from our source material that really challenges the popular image of Jesus. We're going to explore what might just be his most important and maybe most forgotten title. When you picture Jesus, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's the humble carpenter, maybe an uneducated healer, or a poor man just wandering the countryside. That's the story we know. But what if that's not the whole picture? Our source material for this explainer asks us to kind of hit pause on that image and instead look at what the historical accounts actually say. What did the people who met him, followed him, and even argued with him, what did they call him? The source we're digging into today makes a really strong case that Jesus' main identity, the one he was truly known for in his own time, wasn't carpenter or healer. It was something else entirely. Right from the get-go, you have these incredibly influential people like Nicodemus. This guy was a major religious leader. And how does he address Jesus? He calls him Rabbi, which, literally means teacher. And get this, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just a one-time thing. According to the source, the title teacher or rabbi pops up more than 60 times in the Gospels. 60. By a long shot, that makes it his most common identifier. So you've got this massive gap, right? On one hand, there's the popular idea of the uneducated wandering healer. But on the other hand, the source argues for a recognized rabbi, a doctor of the law, a respected teacher. That's a huge shift in how we might understand his whole mission. All right, so where's the proof? Where does the source get this idea? Let's dive into the scriptural accounts themselves and see how this whole case is built. Well, the source points to a whole bunch of things Jesus did that, back then, only a recognized rabbi would be allowed to do. He wasn't just talking on street corners, he was routinely teaching in synagogues. He was handed the secret scroll of Isaiah to read aloud. That was a massive honor reserved only for respected teachers. He sat and debated the religious experts as a peer. Heck, even his enemies, when they were trying to trick him, would start their questions with, "Teacher," basically admitting his status. But here's the kicker. The most crucial piece of evidence, Jesus himself confirmed it. He didn't say, "Oh no, don't call me that." He looked right at his followers and said, "You call me teacher, and you are right." He owned that title. Okay, so that's all from within the Gospels. But what about outside the biblical bubble? Well, the source material points us to a really key historical account from someone who wasn't a follower at all. This is Flavius Josephus, a famous Jewish historian from the 1st century. He's writing history, not scripture. And how does he describe Jesus? Not as a carpenter, not as a miracle worker, but as a wise man and specifically a teacher. That's some pretty powerful evidence coming from an outside source. This, of course, brings up a huge logical question. Back then, you didn't just wake up and decide to be a rabbi. It took years of intense formal schooling. So if he wasn't just a simple carpenter, where on earth did he get his education? And this is where the source material we're looking at introduces a really fascinating theory. It suggests the answer might be found with one of the 3 major Jewish groups of the time, the Essenes. So who were these guys? You can almost think of them as a community of scholar monks. They were known for living together, sharing everything, and being completely devoted to the intense, lifelong study of the scriptures. They were the real scholars of their day. And here's where it gets really interesting. The source highlights these uncanny parallels between how the Essenes lived and how the very first Christian communities lived. Both lived communally, shared all their stuff. The similarities are pretty hard to just brush aside. Now, here's a subtle but really powerful point from the source. We read about Jesus debating and often criticizing the other big groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all the time. But the Essenes? Not a word. Crickets. The source suggests this silence might actually be a clue. Maybe it implies a connection, that he was a graduate of one of their schools, which, by the way, were located right near where he grew up. Okay, so let's just follow this train of thought for a second. If we accept the source's premise that Jesus was a master teacher, what does that mean for his mission? Well, the argument is that his primary goal was to set up a school to train his followers. And we're not talking about casual Sunday school. The picture the source paints is of a highly structured system, a whole network of these communal houses where disciples would live and dedicate themselves full-time to intensive study. The source even suggests a kind of curriculum, comparing the whole training process to growing a fruit tree. It wasn't a quick thing. You've got the first 3 years for foundational learning, then a 4th year for consecration. And only after all that, in the 5th year, was a student finally ready to go out and bear fruit as a teacher themselves. And this lines up perfectly with how Jesus himself talked about it. He used this amazing analogy of building a tower. He said, you don't just start building, you have to sit down and count the cost first. This was a massive commitment that required giving up everything else in your life. So what's the big deal? Why does it matter if we see Jesus as a teacher instead of a carpenter? What's the bottom line here? According to the source, it changes everything about what it means to be a disciple. It transforms it from just, passively trying to copy someone's actions into an active, rigorous, lifelong pursuit of knowledge and deep understanding, the real work of a student under a master rabbi. And the source wraps up by saying, this really shifts the ultimate goal. The highest calling isn't just blind faith, but a deep, studied, intellectual knowledge, a true understanding of the divine, just like this powerful quote from Jeremiah suggests. And so our explainer today leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to think about. If Jesus' number one role was teacher, then what does it truly mean for us to be a student?